Most people think of ADHD as simply a problem with focus, as if it only means you're easily distracted or can't sit still. But ADHD is not just about distraction. It's not just about attention. At its core, ADHD is a condition that affects how the brain regulates time, emotions, priorities, and energy. It is not just about being unable to pay attention. It is about being unable to regulate attention. And that difference changes everything, especially when it comes to relationships. When you live with ADHD, your brain doesn't process the world in the same way most people's brains do. The average person has an internal clock, an internal manager, and internal regulator that helps them balance different parts of life. They can juggle work, friendships, chores, emotions, and responsibilities because their brain automatically distributes attention where it needs to go. But in ADHD, that system doesn't work properly. Attention gets pulled in directions you don't choose. Tasks pile up because you can't manage time, and emotions erupt without warning. This isn't laziness, it's neurology. And when that brain is placed inside the complicated dance of relationships, it creates tension, misunderstanding, and exhaustion. For many people with ADHD, relationships feel like one more task in a life already overflowing with chaos. And it's not because they don't care. It's because their mental bandwidth is constantly overloaded. Think about it like this. Imagine your brain is a computer, but instead of running at full capacity, it has 50 tabs open all at once. Emails, notifications, unfinished work, half-read articles, forgotten appointments, all of it is screaming for attention. The CPU is overheating, the fan is running at max. And then someone you care about asks you to listen to them, to be present, to hold space for their feelings. You want to. You genuinely care. But your mental system is already maxed out. You don't have the RAM to run one more important program. So what comes out looks like neglect, disinterest, or inconsistency, even though inside you may care deeply. This is one of the cruel paradoxes of ADHD people with ADHD intensely. They feel emotions strongly. They can love deeply. But their ability to manage that love in consistent, predictable ways is impaired. They may forget important dates, fail to follow through on promises, zone out during conversations, or swing from hyperfocus to disconnection. To the partner, friend, or family member, it feels like they're not important. To the person with ADD, it feels like failure after failure, guilt piling up, shame building, even though the love is real. The guilt is heavy, because people with ADD often know they are letting people down. They know they're not being consistent. They know they forgot something important again. And that guilt becomes shame. Why can't I just get it together? Why can't I be reliable? Why do I always screw this up? Shame whispers that they're broken, unlovable, or destined to ruin relationships. And when shame grows, relationships become even harder because the person starts to pull away to avoid hurting others or to avoid facing that mirror of their perceived inadequacy. One of the most overlooked aspects of ADD is emotional dysregulation. People think of ADD as purely about focus, but it's also about emotions. ADD feel everything more intensely. Rejection stings more. Conflict burns hotter. A small comment that most people brush off can feel like a dagger. This is called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, and it's common in ADD. It means that criticism or even the perception of criticism can feel unbearable. So in relationships, a partner might say something small like, "Hey, you forgot to take out the trash." To the ADD brain, that lands not as a neutral reminder, but as a deep personal attack, triggering shame, defensiveness, or withdrawal. When your brain is wired to feel emotions like tidal waves, relationships become even more complex. You're not just managing tasks, you're managing storms inside your mind. And when your partner asks for consistency, reliability, or calm, you want to give it to them. But your brain is hijacked by impulses, emotions, and distractions. That's like trying to steer a car while the steering wheel keeps slipping out of your hands. You may be able to drive in bursts, but long, steady control feels nearly impossible. Here's another layer. People with ADHD often experience hyperfocus. This is when attention locks onto something so completely that everything else disappears. Hyperfocus can feel like a superpower. You can dive into work, a hobby, or a new passion with intensity that amazes others. But it also means relationships can feel neglected. If you're hyperfocused on work, your partner may feel invisible. If you're hyperfocused on a new interest, your friendships may fade. It's not intentional neglect. It's a neurological tunnel vision. And because hyperfocus feels rewarding, it's hard to pull out of it, even when you know someone you love needs your attention. What happens then is inconsistency. One day, the person with a date may be all in, fully present, showering love and attention. The next, they may be distant, distracted, or forgetful. This inconsistency confuses partners and friends. To them, it feels like hot and cold. They may interpret it as a lack of care or even manipulation, but to the ADD brain, it's not a choice. It's a reflection of how their attention is wired. And this gap in understanding can destroy trust unless it's acknowledged and managed. Relationships thrive on reliability. We feel safe with people when we know we can count on them, when we know they'll remember the little things, when their presence is steady. But AD disrupts reliability at its core. Forgetfulness, disorganization, impulsivity, they all erode trust over time if not addressed. And this is why so many people with ADD struggle with relationships, not because they don't love, but because their love doesn't consistently translate into actions that others can feel. This is where compassion is so important. Because most people with AD are not careless. They are not selfish. They are not unloving. They are overwhelmed. They are fighting a daily battle with their own brain, trying to remember, trying to follow through, trying to manage chaos that others can't see. And in that fight, relationships can get pushed aside, not because they don't matter, but because the brain is already overloaded just trying to function. The tragedy is that many people with ADD internalize the belief that they are simply not capable of good relationships. They tell themselves, I'm too much. I'm too inconsistent. I'm unlovable. And once that belief takes root, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. They withdraw, they avoid intimacy, they keep people at a distance because they fear hurting them. And so loneliness grows, even though connection is what they crave most. But here's the truth. AD brains can love deeply, can build strong relationships, can be incredible partners, friends, and family members. The difference is that they need strategies, support, and communication to manage their limitations. It is not about pretending AD docent TX, it is about creating systems that work with the ADD brain, not against it. It's about honesty, being open with partners about struggles, apologizing when mistakes happen, and working together to create routines that support connection. For example, someone with ADD may genuinely want to remember birthdays or anniversaries, but constantly forget. A system of reminders, notes, or alarms can bridge that gap. They may struggle with long conversations, but thrive in shorter, focused check-ins. They may find it hard to stay on top of chores, but excel when tasks are broken into small, manageable steps. These adaptations don't erase a dead D, but they make space for relationships within the reality of a DG, and perhaps most importantly, it's about reframing the narrative. People with AD are not broken, they are not doomed. Their brains are different, yes, but different does not mean incapable. The intensity they bring, the creativity, the passion, the deep empathy, these are gifts. When those gifts are harnessed, when shame is replaced with understanding, when partners learn to see the struggle behind the inconsistency, relationships can thrive. Not perfectly, but authentically. Because the truth is, no one has unlimited space in their brain. Everyone has limits. And that just makes those limits more visible. But love is not about being perfect, it's about being present, about trying, about caring enough to work with your flaws instead of pretending they don't exist. And for people with that effort, that honesty, that vulnerability, that's where true connection begins. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of ADHD is that it often hides behind invisibility. On the outside, a person might look fine. They may hold a job, crack jokes, be social, or even appear confident. But inside, their brain is constantly juggling chainsaws while balancing on a tightrope. People around them often don't see the chaos because DH struggles to show up as dramatic meltdowns. They show up as the small, consistent failures that chip away at relationships. The missed text, the forgotten plan, the distracted glance during an important story. Each one feels small, but to the person on the receiving end, they add up. And to the person with a date, they add up in guilt. It makes it hard to hold space for another person because the brain is already overloaded holding space for itself. Think about how exhausting it is to constantly misplace things, constantly fight with time, constantly feel behind, constantly wonder if you're disappointing someone. That mental noise doesn't turn off when you're with someone you love. It sits there in the background, nagging, pulling attention away. So when your partner is trying to be vulnerable, a part of your brain is still stuck on the fact that you left your wallet somewhere, or you have 3 late emails, or you re-terrified you forgot an important meeting tomorrow. Love is in your heart, but chaos is in your mind. And this is where a lot of misunderstandings happen. A partner might say, "You don't listen to me," but for the AD brain, it's not that they don't care, it's that their bandwidth is eaten alive by internal static. Imagine trying to watch a movie with 100 pop-ups constantly flashing across the screen. You want to see the movie. You're interested in the story. But the distractions keep yanking you away. That's what listening with a deep can feel like, especially when life stress is already high. The other piece people don't realize is how much executive dysfunction shapes relationships. Executive function is the brain's management system. It organizes, plans, prioritizes, and follows through. In ADD, executive function is impaired. That means even basic relationship tasks, texting back, showing up on time, remembering to buy groceries, planning a date night become hurdles. And here's the kicker. The person with ADD really knows these tasks are important. They know their partner values them. But knowing doesn't translate into doing. This gap between intention and action creates pain. The partner feels ignored while the person with AD feels guilty and ashamed. Both feel misunderstood. Now add emotional dysregulation into the mix. When conflict happens, the AD brain often reacts with intensity. A small argument escalates quickly. Tears, anger, or shutdowns come faster than expected. And after it's over, the guilt is overwhelming. The person may apologize 100 times, promise to change, vow to be better. But without systems, without awareness, the cycle repeats. For partners, this inconsistency feels like instability. For the AD person, it feels like self-betrayal. Another overlooked aspect is time blindness. AD time experience time the same way. Something in the future feels like it doesn't exist until it's urgent. Something in the past feels distant, even if it just happened. That means a partner may expect long-term consistency, but the ADB brain is living in the now or the urgent. This creates mismatched rhythms. A partner may say, "We've been drifting apart for months," and the AD brain suddenly feels blindsided. To them, it didn't feel that long. It didn't feel like things were slipping. Time was invisible until the problem was in their face. And this disconnect can make partners feel unseen. They wonder, if it mattered, wouldn't you notice? Wouldn't you care? And the other person does care. They care deeply. But their brain doesn't process time and consistency the same way, so care doesn't translate into the steady maintenance that relationships require. And that's like loving someone, but always dropping the ball when it comes to the daily acts that prove it. This is where shame builds. Because deep people are not oblivious to the hurt they cause. They see it. They feel it. And shame becomes a constant companion. Shame whispers, "You're never going to get this right. You'll always disappoint them. They'd be better off without you." And when shame gets too loud, it pushes people into avoidance. They stop trying. They withdraw. They sabotage relationships before they can fail. Because if you leave first, you don't have to face the pain of being told you weren't enough. But let's pause here. Because while this sounds heavy, it's also important to understand that these patterns aren't about lack of love. ADHD people can be some of the most caring, loyal, passionate, and creative partners you'll ever meet. Their spontaneity can bring joy. Their intensity can feel electric. Their empathy can run deep. But those gifts get buried under chaos when the condition isn't managed. And so the challenge becomes, how do you create space for love in a brain that feels like it has no space at all? The first step is awareness. When you have a D, you need to recognize that relationships require intentional systems. You cannot rely on memory or instinct alone because your brain is wired differently. If you love someone, you need external structures, reminders, routines, shared calendars, check-ins. Not because you don't care, but because caring is not enough when your neurology keeps dropping the baton. Love has to be paired with strategy. But awareness is not just for the ADHD person. The partner needs awareness too. They need to understand that forgetfulness is not neglect, that zoning out is not disinterest, that inconsistency is not lack of love. It doesn't excuse the harm, but it explains it. An explanation opens the door to compassion. Instead of assuming malice, the partner can see the neurological struggle underneath. That shift from you don't care to your brain works differently can save relationships. Still, even with awareness, the work is hard. Because a D makes consistency feel unnatural. It's like swimming against the current of your own brain every day. And that effort can be exhausting. This is why burnout is so common. People with ADHD may pour themselves into a relationship at first, using sheer willpower to stay on top of things. But eventually, the energy drains. They collapse into old patterns. And the partner feels abandoned. So the challenge I ascend to just starting strong, building sustainable systems that don't rely on constant effort. Let's talk about guilt again, because guilt is a huge part of why ADD brains struggle with relationships. Guilt piles up like clutter. Every forgotten text, every late arrival, every broken promise, it stacks. And when guilt stacks too high, it turns into paralysis. You feel like such a failure that you stop trying because trying and failing feels worse than not trying at all. This paralysis creates distance in relationships. You avoid the hard conversation. You delay the apology. You ghost instead of facing disappointment. And this avoidance reinforces the very narrative that you're unreliable. It becomes a vicious cycle. The way out of this cycle is small, consistent repair. Not grand gestures, not massive promises, but small acknowledgments. I'm sorry I forgot. It doesn't mean you're not important. I'm working on it. Those small words can break shame's grip. They remind both you and your partner that forgetting is not the same as not caring. Repair is a muscle. The more you practice it, the stronger it becomes. And over time, partners can learn to trust not perfection, but repair. Hyperfocus is another complicated layer. At the beginning of a relationship, D people may hyperfocus on their partner. They pour in attention, energy, affection. The partner feels special, chosen, adored, but hyperfocus eventually fades. And when it does, the ADD person returns to baseline still loving, still caring, but no longer giving that same flood of attention. The partner feels the drop like withdrawal. They wonder, do you still love me? And the ADD person feels guilty because they do still love them, but their brain simply shifted focus. This shift is confusing unless both people understand what's happening. The truth is, hyperfocus is not sustainable love. It's infatuation amplified by neurology. Real love is what comes after hyperfocus fades, the quiet, steady effort to stay connected even when attention wants to wander. For AD people, learning to transition from hyperfocused love to sustainable love is one of the hardest challenges. It requires intentionality. It requires systems. It requires resisting the impulse to chase the new and instead nurturing the familiar. Another overlooked piece is sensory overwhelm. Many AD people are hypersensitive to sound, light, touch, or chaos. Relationships involve shared spaces, shared routines, shared lives. That means more sensory input. A partner's habits, noises, or needs can feel overwhelming without the ADD person even realizing why. They may snap or withdraw not because they don't love, but because their nervous system is flooded. Learning to communicate about sensory needs, I need quiet time, I need space, I need breaks, is essential. Otherwise, partners misinterpret overwhelm as rejection. Let's talk about identity. Many AD people grow up being called lazy, irresponsible, careless, or selfish. These words sink deep. By adulthood, their identity often feels fractured. They see themselves as someone who ruins things, who disappoints others, who never gets it right. This wounded identity shows up in relationships. They may settle for partners who mistreat them because they feel they don't deserve better. Or they may overcompensate, becoming people pleasers who burn themselves out trying to prove they're worthy of love. Both patterns are rooted in the same wound, the belief that did them makes them unlovable. But the reality is the opposite. ADD does not erase worth. ADD does not disqualify someone from love. In fact, the very traits that create challenges, intensity, spontaneity, passion, depth, can also create extraordinary connection when harnessed with awareness. The key is not erasing ADD, but integrating it, not hiding the struggles, but naming them. Not pretending to be neurotypical, but building relationships that honor difference. For example, instead of hiding forgetfulness, an AD person can say, I care about you, but I may forget things. Can we create a system together so I don't drop the ball? That vulnerability invites collaboration instead of shame. Instead of avoiding conflict, they can say, I get overwhelmed easily. If I react too strongly, give me a moment and I'll come back when I'm calm. That honesty builds trust instead of confusion. Relationships don't fail because of AD. They fail because AD is hidden, denied, or unmanaged. When it's brought into the open, when both people work together, love can thrive. It won't look like a neurotypical relationship. It will have its quirks, its systems, its unique rhythm, but it can be real, deep, and lasting. The most important shift is from shame to responsibility. Shame says, I'm broken, I'll never change, I'm unlovable. Responsibility says, I struggle, but I'm willing to work on it, I'm willing to own my mistakes, I'm willing to grow. Responsibility doesn't mean perfection. It means effort, honesty, and repair. And in relationships, that's all anyone can truly ask for. So why do AD brains feel like they don't have space for relationships? Because their bandwidth is already overflowing with internal chaos. Because executive dysfunction makes consistency hard. Because emotional dysregulation makes conflict heavy. Because time blindness makes maintenance tricky. Because shame makes vulnerability painful. But none of these mean love is impossible. They mean love requires awareness, systems, compassion, and repair. The journey is not about making a debt disappear. It's about making space within ADD for connection. It's about saying, my brain is wired differently, but I still want to love, I still want to connect, I still want to grow with you. And when two people walk that journey together with patience, with understanding, with honesty, the result is not just survival, it's intimacy. Not perfect intimacy, not movie script romance, but real, human, messy, enduring love.